Is there anything more relaxing than sitting in a big comfy chair with a cup of coffee and a nice slice of coffee cake? I'm gonna start you off with the basics, showing you how to make a sour cream pecan coffee cake. Now this has a cinnamon streusel layer in the middle and on top. So I'll start with the streusel topping. So for sweetness, I have half a cup of dark brown sugar. To keep it from melting into the coffee cake batter itself, a quarter cup of all-purpose flour. Making a streusel for a coffee cake is also a great opportunity to introduce a real hit of flavor. A teaspoon of cinnamon really achieves that. I've got 3 tablespoons of butter, which I've melted, and I'll just pour that over top and stir that in. When you see the actual white flour disappear within the streusel, you know you have it evenly blended. 3/4 of a cup of chopped pecan pieces. And I'll just stir this so that the nuts get incorporated with the sugar and the flour. A great tip is to actually make this in larger batches. You can freeze a streusel ahead of time, then anytime you want to add a little crunch and character to simple muffins or a banana bread, it's just easy to reach in and sprinkle right from the freezer on top of whatever it is you're baking. I'll set this aside while I start on the coffee cake batter itself. First, I'll sift 2 cups of flour. In addition to the flour, I add a full tablespoon of baking powder. A lot of coffee cake batters tend to be quite dense, so you need a lot of leavening to get them to lift up and hold up that streusel topping in the middle and on top. Half a teaspoon of baking soda. Baking soda activates first as it hits the heat of the oven, and then baking powder kicks in later, so you get a nice light coffee cake. A teaspoon of salt. And the last thing to add to complement the cinnamon in the streusel is a 1/4 teaspoon of allspice. The method we call for this style of coffee cake is called quick cake method. You combine all your dry ingredients in one bowl, all your wet ingredients in a second bowl, and then you blend the two together. So part of the liquids is half a cup of melted butter. I can measure in my 1.25 cups of sugar. Now, technically, sugar is a dry ingredient, but because it melts into the sour cream, butter, and eggs that I combine together, it qualifies as a wet ingredient. I'll pour the melted butter in while the butter is still warm. And now for the sour cream and eggs. I'll break 2 eggs into the wet mixture here. And sour cream does play a prominent role in this coffee cake. 1.5 cups of it. When you're baking with sour cream, you need to use the full fat. If you use low fat or fat-free, it won't hold its shape. And I love how the sour cream balances out the sweetness. And lastly, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. So as you can see, this batter is really made up of simple ingredients. I'll whisk the sour cream, eggs, sugar, and butter together. And so you can actually get a sense that the sugar is dissolving within the sour cream. Then I switch to a spatula and add the wet to the dry ingredients. I like to mix it by hand, first of all, so you don't overmix. What's important to stir it just until the batter comes together. For this particular recipe, I use a 9-inch square pan, and this has been greased with a bit of butter, and I find greasing with butter makes the coffee cake batter easier to spread. Half of the batter goes into the pan. Spread it right into the corners. Just like so. And now for the streusel, and a nice even sprinkle of half of the streusel. I'll admit, I like a lot of streusel in my coffee cake. So to keep the coffee cake from separating when I slice it because of this generous streusel layer, what I do is take a skewer and just loosely run it through just to kind of blend the streusel ever so slightly into the coffee cake, and that way it won't separate when it's sliced. To make the final half of the batter spread easily, I dollop it on top of the streusel. And you can tell that the baking soda is going to work already, reacting with the acidity that's within the sour cream, making this batter change its texture even before it hits the oven. And I'll just use my hands to put the final half of the streusel evenly on top of the cake. I just run my skewer loosely through this streusel just to make sure it stays on the cake. So this is ready for the oven. I've preheated it to 350, and it takes 45 to 55 minutes to cook the coffee cake through. I insert a skewer in the center of it. When it comes out clean, then I know it's done. And the skewer comes out clean, so the cake is done. I'll set this one aside, and I have one already cooled down to slice into. Isn't that pecan streusel topping just so inviting? You just can't wait to get in there and cut a slice. Cake like this, I like to serve in squares. Oh, and you can see that beautiful pecan streusel layer in between. Smell the cinnamon. A coffee cake you can eat with your fingers.